Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Atheist Experience. The opening music was MC Hawking, What We Need More of is Science. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me today is Ashley Perrien, and we have a special guest in, as we've been talking about for the last few weeks. Dr. Vic Stenger is here with us. We thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking a little bit about his new book that's out, among other things, and we'll open the phone lines up almost right away. I'm going to go ahead and muddle through the regular announcements that we have. This is a live public access call-in program. We'll have the number up right after the announcements are over with. It's a chance for the members of the atheist community of Boston to interact with the public and for the public to interact with us, to ask questions, to dispel myths and misinformation about what atheism is, what we believe or don't believe, to provide an avenue for education about science and issues that are relevant to both religious claims and the claims of the irreligious. We're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Boston, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA meets every Sunday at Ventana del Sol on East Oltorf, except for the first Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series. This month's lecture series was postponed because today would, of course, been the first Sunday of the month. We held the ACA elections for the board of directors today. That went off without a hitch. I'd like to thank everybody who attended, participated, voted, ran. The new board has been selected, and the first board meeting for that new board will be next Sunday at Ventana del Sol after the regular meeting. The June lecture that has not may be changed. Originally it was going to be me, but there's been some discussion about having ACA member Mark Lowy present another one of his science lectures coming on the first Sunday in June. We'll let you know more about that. Information about all of our events is available at the ACA website, www.atheist-community.org. The audio portion of this program has always been available on the website for download in various formats, but now the video portion is available as well at Google Video. You can go to atheist-experience.com, click on the link to the archives, and find links in there to all the past shows. Or you can go to Google Video, do a search for Atheist Experience, and you'll find a good selection listing up there. And you can go back and watch any past episodes you've missed. One thing you'll notice is that we do not include the telephone number on that broadcast because we don't want people calling into the studio on days when we're not here. We're broadcast live Sunday from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Central, and the phone number is used for other people in the studio on other days, so we appreciate you not calling in. Then anybody who wants to get in and isn't able to get in on the telephone line today, or if you didn't want to call in, you can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. That email goes to myself, the co-hosts, the people behind the scenes, as well as some other ACA members who are interested in what the TV list is doing. You can also visit our website, and there's feedback forms there, so you can provide feedback about the ACA, what it's doing, and about this program. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast called The Nonprofits. That's PROPHETS. And we were live yesterday. We'll be live again on May 19th. Yesterday was a special edition because Dr. Stenger came down, and we had a long discussion about his book. Some of the stuff we'll probably cover again today because it's important that we get all the information out to the public about how you go about determining what reality is and what claims are actually testable, what can you find out, and how reliable is science. There's this kind of movement in America, at least, that we've seen among homeschoolers and others, where they have this idea that, well, since science can't prove anything with this particularly limited definition of proof, that it somehow becomes irrelevant, and that's just not the case. Everything that we do in our daily lives is completely dependent upon thousands of years of consistent and progress in science and in knowledge and learning about the world. In addition to the lecture series, the online podcast, and this program, the ACA also hosts a number of social events, including the ACA Happy Hour, or the Atheist Happy Hour, which is the Dog and Duck Pub at 17th and Guadalupe downtown. That's every Thursday at 7 p.m. And after this program is over, the cast, crew, guests all get together, and we go to Threadgill's on Riverside. We're on the air till 6 o'clock. We'll be down at Threadgill's around 6:30. All of our events are open to the public. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come down and join us. But if you're coming down to preach, proselytize, or provoke, please wait. We'll open the phone lines up. As a matter of fact, you can put the number up now. We're going to talk to Dr. Stenger for a bit. We'll take some calls, and you can ask your questions and do what you need to do here, so that when we go to Threadgill's, we can have a nice dinner and enjoy conversation without being harassed by anybody. This past week was the National Day of Prayer. Thursday, May 3rd, was the National Day of Prayer, which means it's also the National Day of Reason. A number of secular organizations have been supporting the National Day of Reason. The Rational Response Squad and others have called for blood and tissue donations on that day. The ACA got together, went down to the state capitol, as we normally do. A few of our members to stand out there with signs supporting the National Day of Reason, supporting church-state separation, and promoting cooperative efforts that don't represent an intrusion either into religion or religion's intrusion into the legislative process. We had a really good turnout. There were, I guess, about 15 of us, including some guests up from Houston. What I can say, though, is that it was nice to see that the participation in the National Day of Prayer seems to be massively declining. 2 years ago on the steps of the Capitol, they had a live band, a huge PA system, some seating, and 1,500 to 2,000 people, I'd estimate, showed up throughout the course of the day to stand outside on the lawn of the Capitol and sing and pray in this, what was supposed to be an ecumenical kind of service, but is really just a big Christian church service, really. This year, however, instead of being out in the front, they were kind of confined to, I guess some have called it the Shark Tank. It's an open atrium, kind of a little ways back from the entrance and 2 floors down to get to it. They had, I think, about 150 people at most there. When I went in to take pictures, they had dwindled down to about 20 or 30 people who were singing. We have no problem, as we've said before, with people praying. You're free to believe whatever you want. You're free to pray if you want. You can even pray at the Capitol. Our position, though, is that prayer is ineffective, and there are plenty of other things that we could be doing, ways of using our resources, spending our time to help actually do good. And when the government gets involved and makes official proclamations supporting religion over irreligion, we feel it's a violation of the Establishment Clause, and we made a point about that. But Thursday's demonstration went relatively well. I've been told that at the Capitol in Washington, D.C., they set up 600 chairs and were supposed to have a big service, and through the entire day they never had more than about 37 people in those chairs. So maybe what we're seeing is a slight change in the turning of the tide as far as how popular people are going to be about touting their religious beliefs. I don't have a big objection to anybody doing it in public either, as we mentioned before. It's about whether or not the government does an official proclamation supporting it, and whether or not you're actually doing anything effective. And on that note, I'd like to welcome Dr. Vic Stenger to the program. You're Emeritus Professor of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Hawaii and Adjunct Professor of Philosophy at the University of Colorado. He's written a number of books, including Comprehensible Cosmos, Physics and Psychics, Has Science Found God? And the newest book is called God the Failed Hypothesis, How Science Shows That God Does Not Exist. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your book and the process that led up to that?
Yeah, maybe just so you see where people see where I'm coming from. I could give a little bit of autobiography here. I grew up in an immigrant Catholic working class neighborhood in Bayonne, New Jersey. I was raised as a Catholic, and I received a PhD in physics from UCLA in 1963 and moved to Hawaii, where I spent 37 years as a professor of physics and astronomy. And during those years, I was very much involved in fundamental research in elementary particle physics. Hawaii, it may surprise people to know that the University of Hawaii is a major research university. Mauna Kea, the large high mountain on what's called a Big Island, is the best astronomical site, ground-based astronomical site in the world. So science is very big there, oceanography, and so on. And so we had a very successful program and research in elementary particle physics, and I was involved in any number of discoveries that led to, I worked on quarks, I worked on neutrinos, and eventually the field developed to the point where we now have, by the 70s actually, we had a model that worked very well called the Standard Model of Particles and Fields. And so I have this experience of being involved in asking fundamental questions about the universe. I've always been interested in just that issue. What's the universe made of? Where did it come from? And it was natural for me when I retired in 2000 to continue to probe those questions, and certainly one can't talk about fundamental nature of the universe without raising the question of God. So in this book, I attempt to look at God from a scientific perspective. Now, many people have complained that God is not a subject for science, and I just disagree with that, because I think that the God that most people worship is a God that plays an important role in every event in the universe, from an atomic transition in some far-off galaxy to a leaf falling on the ground here on Earth, to listens to every human thought. Well, such a God should be detectable by his effects, by the way in which he makes his presence known in the natural world. So while it's true that science deals with natural phenomena, the God that most people believe in should be have an effect on natural phenomena, and so this is the approach that I take.
So basically you're talking about, for example, a deistic view of God, where you've got a God who started the universe and then doesn't interfere anymore. That one would probably be beyond scientific investigation. But any God who interacts in any way with the material, physical reality that we experience should then provide us something that we can actually test for.
Well, actually, if I could talk about the deist God for a moment, this is the God that the God of the Enlightenment, you might say, the God that many of the founders of our country actually believed in, like Thomas Jefferson, the creator of the Declaration of Independence, is not the Christian God. The creator in the Declaration of Independence is this deist God, the God that created the universe. And at that time in history, physics was very successful. Science had reached a very successful level with Newtonian physics. And people believed that everything that happened was determined by the laws of physics, and so it was quite natural for reasonable people of the time to say, well, the only God that's necessary is a God that created the universe and made those laws. And if that God is perfect, then you should have just left the universe alone after that. So that God is at that time was a possible God. However, since that time, let's say if we move up to the current age, where we have so much more knowledge of the universe and of physics than we had at that time, than people had at that time, we have quite a different picture, and that is that it now appears, based on our best knowledge in cosmology, that the universe started in a state of maximum chaos, what we call maximum entropy. And if that's the case, then the universe had no structure, had no laws, was basically nothing at that period, at that early moment in the universe's history. And if there had been a creator God, like the deist God, that God, we would have preserved no memory of that God in the current universe. So the deist God is kind of ruled out by this argument, by the fact that there wasn't this maximum chaos at that time, and in fact, the only God that is the only creator that seems possible is the creator that Einstein objected to, and that is the creator that throws dice. Right. So maybe there was a creator, but that creator created chaos, and we have no memory of that creator. That includes the deist God, and that includes any other creator God of any culture. That God, if he created the universe, he created it, and then he put it into a state that we now have no memory of what its intentions would have been.
What about the idea, the deistic God again? It almost seems like maybe I'm not understanding, but he's not ruled out so much as ruled irrelevant. Because, again, all-powerful God could have created that singularity with ultimate chaos and said, go on from there, and just see what happens.
Yeah, right.
Again, that would kind of point to an irrelevant God versus a ruled out
That's
God.
it. That's right. That's totally possible that there was such a God, but it was an irrelevant God. It was a God that has no point in praying to such a God, because that God has nothing to do with the current universe.
Yes.
Is not a part of the current universe. Now, of course, that's not the God that most people worship today.
Right.
The God that most people worship today is a God that is this participant in the universe. So while I think we could rule out a creator at this point, based on what I've said so far, we still need to talk about the God who steps in after the creation and takes actions that
Tinkers.
that may affect our lives and so if that God exists, and if that God is an important God, that God should be detectable by these actions taken after the creation.
That's one of the things that we talked about before. There is this notion that, and I've talked about this on the show in the past, the common sentence that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. And you've taken a position that's in opposition to that sentence, that it's just fundamentally wrong.
Yes, let me start at this point. Even the most pious believer has to admit that there isn't, because this is a fact, there isn't sufficient empirical evidence for God that has satisfied the consensus of science. God is not a part of modern science. If there was such evidence, if it had been accepted by modern science, then evidence would be in the textbooks, along with the evidence for quarks and the evidence for electrons and atoms and everything else. So that's a fact. That's just a fact. That's not an opinion. There is no evidence for God, no good evidence for God that would stand up under the normal scrutiny of science. Okay, so then you say, well, absence of evidence is not evidence for absence. Well, I dispute that, because I think absence of evidence is good evidence for absence. We don't believe in Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster because we don't have any evidence for it. Why should we believe in anything without any evidence? In any case, this book goes beyond that. This book not only talks about the absence of evidence, and I've talked about that in some previous books as well, but this book claims that you can find positive evidence that allows you to basically falsify the God hypothesis, where the God hypothesis refers again to this God, not all possible gods, but the God that most people worship.
Right. Could you give us an example of what you're talking about by the positive evidence that actually works actively against this notion of a God?
Yes, well, you mentioned prayer earlier. In fact, I wanted to make a comment on that, if I could, that has nothing to do directly with your question. But I find it rather amusing that Christians always have to have this grand public show of praying, which is contrary to what Jesus told them to do. If you look into Matthew, I don't remember the exact verse. Anybody can look it up.
Hide in your closet, hide in the closet.
Matthew 6:5 is
He said, if you were to pray, something like this, and again, I can't quote it exactly, but people should look it up. People should read the Bible. I agree. Read the Bible. The more Christians who read the Bible, the less Christians we would have. He says something like, if you were to pray, don't pray like the hypocrites. Go in a closet and pray. Well, obviously they don't do that. But anyway.
No, they want to get prayer in wherever they can.
If there was a God who answered prayers in a significant way, not just one every 10 million years or something like that, but a God, there are a billion prayers being said, every second or something? How many prayers are being said? At what rate? If they're worthwhile, if there was any purpose behind it of praying, then there should be some results of that. And this is something that can be and has been tested by scientific means. You can do experiments, carefully controlled experiments on intercessory prayer, blind studies and so on, using all the best techniques that we know from other sciences, apply that. And let's just suppose hypothetically that a whole set of such experiments are done, and the result is conclusively agreed to by everybody that Catholic prayers really work. Catholic prayers can be used to heal the sick. Furthermore, the results show that Catholic prayers are the only prayers that work. Hindu prayers don't work. Buddhist prayers don't work. Protestant Christian prayers don't work. Jew, Muslim, only Catholic prayers work. Well, I can't see how one could think of any plausible natural explanation for that. And if you were to observe such a phenomenon, you'd have to say, well, gee, maybe God exists after all. A God who answers prayers exists. And furthermore, the Catholics had it right all along, that the God is the Catholic God. And I would have to, if I saw such a thing happen, I would have to become a believer again. I'm already baptized, so all I would have to do is walk down to the nearest Catholic church, go into the confessional and say, "Blessed be Father, for I have sinned. It has been 50 years since my last confession."
50 years. Let me grab a sandwich.
And I would be welcomed back in the fold, I'm sure, because you'd love to have me, I'm sure.
Of course. You were talking about, this notion of the efficacy of prayer. We don't see any evidence that this is actually the case.
Yeah, I should have mentioned, if I could interrupt,
Sure.
just to finish that story. There have been a series of very good experiments done by reputable people, reputable scientists, reputable institutions, published in reputable journals. I mean, the whole thing's reputable. From Mayo Clinic, Harvard, Duke University, and these were experiments that weren't done by atheists or skeptics. They were experiments that were pretty much done by believing scientists who wanted to find evidence for prayer. That was certainly deep in their heart. That's what they wanted to find. But they were good scientists. They said, let's let the data decide. And that's always the proper thing to say if you're a scientist. Go wherever the data go. And they have uniformly found that there's no visible effects. I'm sure more experiments are being done. But this also illustrates another point, and that is that you often hear the statement that science has nothing to say about God. Well, here's an example where where experiments have been done and can be done that address the question of supernatural.
Sure.
I'd be interested in your opinion also on, again, it's often said that science has nothing to say about God. They're two separate realms. They shouldn't interact, things like that. Are people being honest with that, or is it almost a protective measure of saying, no, these are my beliefs, I don't want science touching them because it has the potential to damage them? I don't want my beliefs thoroughly investigated because it could dispute them.
I have found that the people who say this, who say science has nothing to say about God, are not theists.
Okay.
Most theists actually believe, and there's any number of books that have been written, far more books than I've written, on the other side, claiming scientific evidence for God. They want to believe that it's there, that there is the evidence. Another book that I wrote earlier called "Has Science Found God?" Examined those claims and found that they didn't hold up under careful, critical scrutiny. So the people who say science should have nothing to say about God are mostly scientists.
Okay.
Let's take the National Academy of Science, for example. There was a survey done back in. That's the elite of American scientists, the National Academy. And there was a survey of their membership done back in 1998. that indicated that only 7% of them believed in a personal God. Probably exactly the opposite of the general community. So there they are. There is this bunch of atheists, atheist scientists, and they make various pronouncements that they put out. And one of their announcements that had to do with evolution and creationism said, well, science has nothing to say about the supernatural, has nothing to say about God. Well, as I just pointed out, that's just wrong. It's clear that science can say something about God, because God is the God that most people worship, is a God that is going to have empirical effects, such as I just talked about, such as prayer. And so why are they doing it? Maybe that's a protective measure, where they want to, they don't, number one, they probably don't want to get religious people mad at them, because mad at science, because that might cause the worst thing that can happen to any scientist, and that is lose their funding.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there's also, of course, this whole business of the war between evolution and creation. And there are a lot of scientists who think that the best policy is not to attack religion directly on that issue, even though the whole motivation for creationism is 100% religious.
Yes.
Yet the various groups, such as the National Center for Science Education, that work to try to keep evolution in the schools, will say, no, we're not going to criticize religion in any way, because we want those more moderate religions who see the possibility, allow for the possibility of evolution and are willing to accept evolution. The Catholic Church supposedly supports evolution, although I think you're going to see them backing down from that with a new pope who has, I think, different ideas than the previous pope. So these groups are going to start backing off from that. In the meantime, they want to keep this support, and I think at some point it's going to start falling apart. And I think there are more important issues out there, frankly, on the question of science and religion, the way in which the Bush administration, for example, has suppressed science, has made decisions one after the other that were based on faith rather than evidence, including the war in Iraq. It was certainly not based on evidence, so it must have been based on faith. And these kinds of terrible things are going on in the name of religion. And I think so. I think scientists have to start speaking out against the thinking process that goes into this. And even in the case of evolution, when you look at it, it's hard to see how evolution can ever be made compatible with Christianity, because one of the tenets of evolution is that humanity was an accident. Well, Christians don't believe that. Most religions don't believe that. Most religions think that humans are special creations of God in His own image, and that's a conceit that we all have, that we're the center of the universe. And science, from the time of Copernicus, and Galileo have disputed that we're not at the center of the universe, that we're just these little tiny speck in space and time, and it would be better off to accept that and recognize that and learn to live with it.
There's been a lot of people who, once that type of point's been made, will say, well, if we are insignificant and we are a speck, then doesn't life become meaningless? And what I've continually talked about on this show is how much more meaningful life is once you eliminate this notion of an afterlife, that you're kind of like wiping your feet here, working to get the good stuff that comes after you're dead, and instead we could be focusing on making this world a better place.
That's exactly right. I mean, if there is no afterlife, and I think the chances of there being an afterlife are negligible, because your brain is what you are, and that your brain is going to disintegrate within minutes of your death, the lack of oxygen. So you live with what you've got, and that's this current life, and you try to make the most of that and make it more meaningful. And there's plenty of ways to make it meaningful. I've had a happy life. I've had the same wife for 43 years. I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. We all get along very well and enjoy each other's company. And I certainly enjoyed the 40 years of research that I spent in elementary particle physics. That was just fun. It was a lot of it was hard work, but a lot of it was enjoyable too. And I've traveled the world, and I've gone to the great art museums, and one of the things I love is religious art. My favorite piece of art is Michelangelo's Pieta in the Basilica in Rome. It's just a marvelous work, and I look at that now and get a religious feeling from it. I get a feeling of great pride in the fact that here's something that somebody of my own species was able to do, to take a rock and a hammer and a chisel and to create such an incredibly beautiful, moving piece of sculpture where you look at the face of me, look at the Pieta someday, and just look at Mary's face, and what you see is a mother grieving for her dead son. Just a beautiful thing, and I get great joy in religious art without any religious belief behind it, and religious music the same way. I've always enjoyed religious music.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times. Since you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, how can you enjoy any religious art, or knowing that movies aren't real and such? How can they be enjoyable? And I don't necessarily need to believe in movies when I go to watch them to enjoy them. They're still good, fun stories to listen to, and even if they are just made up.
They're the work of humans.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yeah.
For those of you just tuning in, we're live Sunday, May 6, 2007. We've got Dr. Victor Stenger in the studio today, author of God, the Failed Hypothesis, How Science Shows That God Does Not Exist. We've been talking about scientific claims about God, how the religion and how the God that most people believe in is something you can actually test for, and when you find a lack of evidence to support that claim, that there's no good reason to believe that it exists. The phone lines are open for people who've called in on previous programs to ask the completely irrelevant question about my credentials. We have somebody in here who actually has credentials. Professor Emeritus of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Hawaii, and also Adjunct Professor of Philosophy at the University of Colorado. So for those of you who scoffed because I didn't happen to have a doctorate, we have somebody with several who's willing to answer some questions if you feel like calling in. We were talking a little bit about different scientists and their views. I mean, of course, some of the people who've done the Duke study, for example, you have to think that they're looking for like a Templeton Prize type of situation. But they were good enough scientists and had the integrity to publish their results even when it showed that it did not produce the conclusion they were looking for. Yeah. There's another individual that I was reading about, and I think you may be familiar with him. If not, then we can skip it. Frank Tillman, who has this equation that he says proves God exists, and I think he's tied it to even demonstrating Jesus and other metaphysical claims.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one, but I am familiar with another physicist, I believe, named Unwin. I'm sorry I forgot his first name, but he wrote a book, came out a few years ago, called The Probability of God, where he uses Bayesian statistical analysis to supposedly prove that God exists with high probability. I mean, he comes up with a certain probability, about 60%, which he then boosts up to 90%. But a physicist friend of mine took a look at his numbers that went to the calculation and put in his own numbers and came up with a probability of 10 to the minus 35 that God exists. So that's one of the things about this Bayesian analysis, or any calculation, it depends on what you put in, right?
Yeah.
So I would dispute anybody who claimed that they could make a mathematical test of God's existence. You have to, unfortunately, rely on objective observations as best as you can. I mean, not unfortunately, you want to rely on objective observations as much as you can, but unfortunately most of those tend to be qualitative rather than quantitative. I'm not sure how you can make the whole thing quantitative.
Yesterday, May 5th, Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron from the Way of the Master series had challenged members of the Rational Response Squad to a debate. I think it's going to air
The 9th.
on Nightline or something on the 9th. Ray Comfort had made the kind of brazen proclamation that in 13 minutes he could prove scientifically that God exists without any reliance on the Bible and faith. And the first thought that popped through my head is, well, if you're going to do a scientific proof, you certainly wouldn't rely on the Bible and faith. So I don't know why he mentioned that in the first place. But it seemed to me that somebody who could make a claim like that has a fundamental misunderstanding about science and perhaps even a misunderstanding about God, or is using the label God in a way that certainly differently from what you're talking about.
Yeah, in fact, I think we should clarify the meaning of the word proof, because it is true that throughout the history of theology, there have been claims of proofs of the existence of God. I mean, Thomas Aquinas had his 5 proofs of the existence of God. It's amusing that his first one was basically the Aristotle notion of the prime mover. Everything needs to have a mover. So there must be some original mover. Well, it turns out that everything doesn't need a mover, so that falls by the wayside. So there have been these kinds of proofs, but let's face it, a proof, in the sense of a logical proof, is only as good as the assumptions that go into it. I mean, that's all that a logical process does. You make some assumptions, you have some axioms, and then you go through a logical, or in the case of mathematics, you go through a mathematical process, and if you haven't made any mistakes in that process, then the proof is certain. But certain only insofar as those assumptions are correct, and only in that context. Now, there's no way to use that to say anything about anything in the universe. All you're doing is working in a circle, proving something within the own. I mean, it's like pure mathematics that you make some assumptions and then you carry out and you draw some conclusions, and that mathematics need not have anything to do with the real world. The only way you can connect any of that to the real world, and the way mathematics is connected to the real world, is through observations, and it's So the word proof, you notice in my title, incidentally, my subtitle is How Science Shows That God Does Not Exist. It doesn't say science proves that God does not exist. And I've avoided the word proof for just that reason, because most people think I mean proof with certainty. And let me say, I've had more people write critical reviews of my book who have missed that point totally. They say, it's really amusing how many people have written Amazon reviews where they said, I haven't read the book, but it's wrong for this reason, because you just can't prove God doesn't exist. I don't care what you say. And I throw the book away. I mean, at least they should read it before they make that conclusion. And the point is that if I use the word proof in science, it has to be understood that it's being used pretty much the same way it's used in the law courts. It's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the kind of proof. And when I say God is non-existent based on science, arguments of science, I mean, what I mean is the hypothesis of God is falsified by the data, by empirical data, beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't mean that it's certain. You always have to keep the possibility open that something might change in the future, and science is always provisional. But believe me, it's not as provisional as people sometimes think. We know a lot now. We've had science now for 400 years, modern science, and we've learned a lot, and not that much has changed. The Newtonians Galileo's principle of relativity, Newton's laws of motion, Newton's laws of gravity, they're still used today. We fly to the moon with these principles. Conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, they're part of Newtonian physics, and yet we still use them today. None of these laws have been observed to be violated. What we've done is we've expanded the base of physics. We haven't really changed it. There hasn't been, Steve, your own local boy here, Stephen Weinberg, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, has said that the only paradigm shift that has ever occurred in science was the Newtonian paradigm shift. In other words, even the revolutions, as they're sometimes called, of quantum mechanics and relativity of the 20th century were not such a dramatic shift in the way we think. So we know a lot, and while we have to always be open for further changes, and there will certainly be changes, we can draw a lot of conclusions based on what we already know.
Certainly. We were talking yesterday about constructing scientific models that describe the world, and this kind of tied into it. We know that the Newtonian laws are wrong at the wide ends of the spectrum in that sense. But as you were pointing out, they're still useful. They're used every day. They tell us how to build buildings and send people to the moon and everything else. And one of the examples that we talked about yesterday also was the flat Earth model. We know fundamentally the Earth is not flat, and yet that model still has its application in building buildings, etc. And in some cases, we go out of the way to make the Earth flat where it's not. As a reminder, we'll be going to Threadgill's after the program. We're on until 6 o'clock, and we'll probably be down at Threadgill's around 6:30. You're welcome to come down to me as any atheist or atheist-friendly person. If you're coming down to preach or provoke, if you're looking for a debate or a discussion or whatever, we'll have the phone number back up in a moment and call in. The lines are open. We're not positive whether or not we're still having the same phone line problems that we had last week. Hopefully we don't. So one of the questions that's come up several times, there's this idea, because Dawkins has put out a book, and Harris has put out a book, and Dennett has put out a book, and now your book's out as well, and the many vocal proponents of atheists, particularly among this select group, have been accused of being arrogant or condescending or whatever, that they're militant or fundamentalist atheists. And the question I have, in your opinion, do we still need to play nice? Obviously, Richard Dawkins has been a proponent and has even likened it to warfare and made links to whether or not religious education for the young is child abuse. But in reality, what he's advocating is let's stop sitting back and actually start getting the word out and being more forceful about it. Do you think that is a good approach, or should we play nice?
No reason why we can't be nice. I mean, we can be nice and make our arguments as strong as possible. Certainly name-calling or ad hominem types of arguments don't go anyplace anyway. They're not worth anything. So you just make your arguments, and you agree to follow a procedure. The thing you have to insist on, though, is rational thinking. That's where it breaks down. The geneticist Jerry Coyne is quoted in Dawkins' book as saying that the battle between religion and science today is not the battle between evolution and creationism. It's the battle between reason and superstition. Now, if theists want to use reason, they have every right to do that. If they're gonna be arguing on the basis of ancient superstitions, beliefs that were based on the myths of a primitive tribe that lived in the desert 2,000 years ago and thought very highly of itself, and they regard themselves as special, then there's nothing to argue about. But if we're going to argue on the basis of rational argument, tell me what your assumptions are, tell me what your reasoning is, then of course we can have no objection to that. We would like to have just that kind of debate. And there are a lot of theologians, incidentally, who do this. I referred to them in my earlier book, Has Science Found God, as the premise keepers. They were, maybe that was too cute, but I really was sympathetic with them. I said, these were theologians who accept science, are not like the Dembskys and the Beatties and the flat Earth creationists before them, who want to denigrate science. These were people who are willing to accept science and then are trying to come to grips with that and be able to come up with a picture of God that is consistent with science. Because after all, they are theologians. They can't argue that God doesn't exist, because then they'd be out of a job. So they've got to start with the assumption, the premise that God exists, and then try to make it consistent with all we know in science and everything else. All kinds of knowledge come into the issue. And they've done fairly well in doing that. You can come up with a pretty abstract idea of God. And a number of them have written critical reviews of my book because they said, I haven't recognized that. I haven't recognized what Polkinghorne has said or what someone else has said. The point is, I have. But in this book, that's not the God I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the theologian's God, the God who may have created the universe and let it run, just like the deist God was supposed to have done. It's kind of a modern deist God that some of these people propose. You remember I pointed out that there was a problem with evolution in Christianity, where evolution assumes that humanity was an accident, that if you started up, as Stephen Jay Gould had put it, if you rewound the tape of evolution and didn't change anything, didn't change any laws of physics or chemistry or biology, and you just let evolution run again, you would have a totally different set of species today than we have now, because there was so many accidents that went into the process of producing us. You wouldn't have humanity. And there's no way that Christianity can explain that. Now, Polkinghorne, this physicist who became an Episcopal priest, believes that God did poke his finger in every once in a while to make that happen. Well, that's not evolution anymore. That's intelligent design. There are other believers, such as Kenneth Miller, who is a biologist, who's also a Catholic, who have come up with a different theology. And in their theology, God created the universe with all these possible pathways, and the fact that, and then let it go, so that this is the plague dice God again, right. and let those pathways work themselves out. So one pathway was through humanity, but another pathway may have been through some other advanced creature. And it was just an accident that happened to go through humanity, the path. And in any case, the point is that they believe that God's purposes were served, whatever the path
right.
was followed. So that's fine. That's a God that you can't rule out. It's not a God you can find any evidence for. There's still the absence of evidence argument against such a God. But it's not the God that most people talk about. The theologian God is not the God that the person in the pews is praying to.
It's unrecognizable, and most of the people in the pews would look at the God that the theologians talk about as heresy, actually, because they're denying many of let's say, the precepts of the Catholic Church, where you have Jesus as a divine being, etc. And I wonder, to me, it seems that the theologians that you're talking about they've come to grips with reality, and then kind of defined their God back. We're going to scale this back because we can no longer support the broader model, so we're going to just, fit God in wherever we can. And they use that then as a justification for religion, completely separate from the idea of a God, and then begin to make arguments that religion is in fact a good thing, whether or not there's a God behind it, or whether or not the God behind it is identifiable by the worshipers. So this kind of layer of obfuscation or whatever between them.
Well, another common notion is that God emerges from natural processes.
Like consciousness emerging from...
Yeah, that there's this notion of emergence that grew out of complexity theory, that certain properties and principles that are not built into the material system, where we start with just particles bouncing off one another. There's no wetness in those particles, but when they join together to make molecules of water, that water has this property of wetness, so wetness emerges. Well, sure, wetness emerges, but that doesn't mean it's any supernatural notion. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say that, and it's interesting that a number of Christian theologians accept the fact that there probably isn't a soul, because a separate soul, a spiritual thing, as opposed to a material thing, because of the results from brain science that now show so conclusively that thinking is a physical process, emotions and everything else are a physical process. So they've accepted that, but then they're trying to see, okay, now maybe out of this there still will grow as humanity and the rest of the universe evolves further, will grow toward what is sometimes called the omega point, a point of ultimate complexity, and that's God. That was an idea that went back to a famous Catholic priest, Teilhard de Chardin, who is also a paleontologist and had proposed this notion of the omega point. And in fact, there's a new book out by a physicist named Frank Tipler from Tulane University called the Physics of Christianity. He's the author of a book that came out maybe 10 years ago or so called The Physics of Immortality. And he has some incredibly amusing ideas. I mean, but the thing is, he's a good physicist, and it's hard to find things wrong with his physics. It's just that the way he then interprets it in terms of Christianity and this ultimate movement of. I mean, let me tell you what. I mean, you have to, if you're not familiar with this, it's well worth looking into, because his idea is that that life on Earth probably has only about 50 years. He's convinced that we're going to destroy ourselves within about 50 years. But in the meantime, we're going to build these robots, and these robots are going to go off and they're going to explore the universe, and they're going to evolve into ever more complex artificial intelligence systems. And what they'll be able to do is control, in the far distant future, we're talking about not just billions and billions of years, something like 10 to the 18 years in the future, they will see to it that the universe collapses back down toward a point. And as it collapses, in other words, they'll be able to control the collapse of the universe. And as it collapses, as when something gravitationally collapses, its clocks run slower and slower and slower. And so that means that there's an infinity of time there left while this collapse takes place. And I may not be doing a good job explaining it. Should have him on to have him explain. And so during that time, that infinite time, everything can happen over and over again. And so these advanced life forms will be able to regenerate every human that ever existed and have them live their life over and over again, not only over and over again with the life that they had, but every other possible life, where everybody did every possible thing they might have done in their lives. So that was kind of the immortality, that since there was an infinite amount of time, everything could happen. And he works this out from actual physics. Now, the new book, which I have only gotten a bit into, so I can't explain exactly how he then relates it to Christianity, but he's got explanations in there for the resurrection, physics explanations for the resurrection, for the virgin birth, and so on. So I think I would like to think that he's playing a great hoax on the rest of us. But usually, you think of the so-called hoax. You remember that one,
Yes.
where the postmodern, where Alan Sokol wrote that article.
Filled with so much
But
jargon.
the trouble is, postmodern people were talking that way.
Yeah.
But Christians don't talk the way this guy talks. So he's not. He's making up a whole new universe there.
P.Z. Myers and
Of
some
course, it's total
folks
nonsense,
in
but boy, is it amusing, and it's interesting reading. And if you know the physics, it's even more amusing.
We've got some folks on the line. We're going to go ahead and start taking some calls real quick. We've got Schilling. How you doing?
All right.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a bit of a tangential question for Dr. Stenger. I was wondering what the reception has been with the release of his book, touring or lecturing on it, and things of that nature, since it's been about 6 or 8 months since Dawkins and Harris had a lot of success. If he thinks that success is growing or staying consistent, or if it's kind of waning.
Well, my book did make it to the New York Times bestseller list on March 11th, and it was number 21. I think it's been lingering a little bit off the list since then. Now you have a new book coming out by Christopher Hitchens, which I think you'll see on the list pretty quick, because he's been on every time you turn the TV on, you see him there. He's got a good publisher who really makes sure he gets on TV. And so I don't think there's any sign yet of a waning interest. Hope not.
Okay. And what has been the reception, if any, from your academic colleagues?
Well, it's from the philosophy department. It's been very good. From my physics colleagues, both here and in Hawaii, I haven't heard much from them. They've congratulated me, but it's not something physicists like to think too much about. So,
Right.
but I haven't had any real strong negative replies or reactions from anybody. I haven't had any hate mail. I've gotten obviously a large number of email messages where people said they disagreed with me, but that's fine, as long as they're disagreeing on a rational basis and they're saying, "Here's why I think you're wrong." That's okay. That's okay. I don't mind that. And so I think it's because in my book I really don't call names, or I try to just stick to the arguments. And I also, time and time again, I remind people that, look, you provide me with the evidence, and you provide any good scientist with the evidence, and a scientist would have to believe. Besides, why would a scientist object to finding evidence for the existence of God? Think of all the great new research that would make available. That would be very well funded. We'd have a good time spending the government's money on that, traveling around the world as we like to do, to conferences and eating good food and drinking good wine and having nice conversation with our friends. That's a great life.
Yeah, I think
Why would we object to that?
it's interesting that you bring that up in the book a couple times. I've noticed. It's often said that the scientific community is some kind of cabal of closed-minded people who don't want to accept that there is a God, because we are God. Man is God. We are the ultimate. and so they're closed-minded. They're not going to accept this hypothesis of a God out there. Whereas you got to point out that if there actually was some form of evidence of a God, they would be instant billionaires through funding alone, if nothing else.
Yeah.
They would be rocketed to the top of every list. And
right.
so, no, there is absolutely nothing in the world keeping them from promoting this evidence, because they'd have the world at their feet.
The scientists who are dogmatic are the ones who insist that science has nothing to say about this, that we should stay out of it.
Yeah.
And they play right into the hands of people such as Philip Johnson, the lawyer that started the whole intelligence design movement with a series of anti-Darwin books. I mean, he has said time and time again that there is this bias of naturalism, that science assumes that everything is material, everything is natural, and is dogmatically attached to that. And so every time a scientist says, well, science has nothing to do with supernatural, just with the natural, they're playing right into the hands of the people like Johnson. I claim, science has every right to study anything that's observable. And that includes, incidentally, morality. Morality is supposed to be something that science has nothing to say about. Well, maybe science isn't going to tell us what's right and wrong, but science could certainly look at human behavior. That's observed behavior. Science is basically involved with observing the world, observing the universe, observing people, observing everything that causes some kind of signal to come into your sensory apparatus, and trying to understand that and make up models to describe what you see, and trying to make those models as objective and universal as possible, so they don't rely on any particular point of view, that they're objective, and it's just a kind of a smooth, natural procedure.
You brought up intelligent design, and we end up talking to a lot of different people on the program about their ideas about abiogenesis or evolution or Big Bang cosmology, et cetera. Eventually, most of these arguments about the existence of God end up coming back to this prime mover type argument. But a step before that, one of the most common claims is this anthropic principle, or the idea that the universe is finely tuned for life. And you talked about that a little bit in your book as well. And I was wondering if you'd explain a little bit more about how this is kind of, because the anthropic principle is real, but it's misperceived and misused by the intelligent designer.
Yeah, well, of course, the anthropic principle itself, the term is misleading, and it's better to just call this the fine-tuning argument. So let me refer to it to that, and that's the argument that the constants of nature are finely tuned for the production of life. That if they had been any different, then life wouldn't exist. So it's pretty clear that there was some fine-tuner out there that made sure that those constants would be what they are, so that life could exist. Now, that's life in general. I mean, there's no particular constants that are fine-tuned for humanity, so that to call it the anthropic principle, to say that humanity had to exist, is really a misnomer. Now, it's true that if you were to change any number of physical constants by the slightest amount, that life as we know it would be impossible. But that doesn't mean that all plausible forms of life would not exist under those changes circumstances. I played a little game myself with this years ago, where I wrote a program called Monkey God. In fact, you can run it. You go onto my web page, which is easy to find by just Googling me. You can find a page where you can run your own universe, design your own universe. Just change a few constants and see what kind of universe you come up with. And when I run this program, I changed some basic parameters by 10 orders of magnitude randomly, and I found that half of the universes that were produced still had stars that lived a billion years or more, and so that would be, of course, one of the first requirements for life would be enough time for it to evolve. So I think it's not as unlikely as people think. There have been a number of other studies now that are published that have done more sophisticated things than I did at that time, and have pretty much backed up that same conclusion that some form of life may have been possible under a wide range of circumstances. There's another point here, and that is that when you think about it, if God were perfect, why would he have to fine-tune the universe for life? Why wouldn't the universe just be able to produce life no matter what the conditions were? If humanity was so special, you would think that we could live any place. We could live in space. But that's just kind of a logical argument. I just prefer to just think that we don't know what kind of universe might be possible with a different set of constants. We can make some calculations, but we don't really know. All our experience is based on just a single universe that we have, and it's impossible to infer what could go on in another universe with a different set of physical laws and constants. We can't judge, and so we can't conclude that this universe is special. The way I like to put it is that the universe isn't fine-tuned for humanity. Humanity was fine-tuned to the universe. We happen to evolve in a universe that had those constants. It was suited. They were suited for. If we weren't suited for the world, we wouldn't be able to live in it. So life obviously evolved in that situation where on the Earth had an atmosphere that was transparent to what we call visible light, a certain very narrow region of the electromagnetic spectrum. The sun puts out a lot of light in that region, and so it was natural for our eyes to develop. And it's really silly to think that the sun has that spectrum, and the atmosphere is transparent to that spectrum because our eyes are sensitive to that region. That's the kind of reasoning that you're talking about here, and of course that's silly.
I always like the idea that our nose is perfectly designed to hold a pair of glasses.
Right, it was
that type of argument.
I think Voltaire said that.
Yeah. I did have one other question, though. On a more personal note, I guess, you go through a lot of arguments in the book of argument from design, problem of evil, things like that. What I guess is personally is kind of like the clincher or the fallback argument for you. For me, I've always thought the problem of evil is kind of like the one that convinces me the most.
Yeah.
What in your mind, I guess, is the one that does it for you?
Well, there's a related argument to the problem of evil, and that is the problem of non-belief. Because one of the points that a theist can make is to say that God hides himself from us, and that's why these effects that I talked about are not visible, because he's purposefully hidden himself from us. Well, that God is not a good God, because if the only non-believers in the world were people who were bad people and didn't believe because they didn't want to believe, then that would be one thing. But most non-believers are open to evidence. Show me the evidence, and I'll believe. And the fact is, they still don't believe. So God is hiding himself from people who are open to belief in God. And that means that he's cutting himself off from these people He has just a chosen few. In fact, that the view of most evangelical Christians seems to be a Calvinist view, that God has a select few. They, of course, that select.
Yeah.
And that these are the ones he wants to spend eternity with, and everybody else is going to be doomed. And that explains a lot of the problems that we have with evil and so on. Namely, God's evil, and that's why we got evil in the world, because God is evil. And that's not the God that most people want to believe in. They want to believe in a good God, a God that has love for humanity, and that's the God. So that's you see, that's the God that we can rule out, because there should be evidence for that God. There should be evidence for a good God.
Yeah, you've got the situation where a God has supposedly created the universe and set it up so that it very much looks like no God created it, has made sure, gone out of his way to hide himself from everybody in every aspect, given us brains that work with reason and logic to help discover the world around us, and every discovery we make continues to demonstrate that there is no God, and he's done all this. Then supposedly you have this situation where he inspires a book that tells everybody, if you're just willing and open to understanding and receiving me, I'll help you out. You can come to know me. And then yet there are people like us who are certainly open to any evidence that would support the idea, and he's intentionally not. So that problem of non-belief is very, very strong, when a problem that kind of goes along with the problem of evil. But we got Phil on the line. How you doing?
Hi guys, how's it going?
Good.
Hey, Dr. Stenger, I had a question for you. I'll just ask my question and then hang up and let you guys comment on it if you'd like.
Great.
Seems like to me that the last bastion of my friends who are Christians, when I debate them, is this question of morality. And when I talk to them about how that there are, evolutionary explanations for morality, then they come back with, well, there's no moral obligation. I guess I'm not sure, where they're going with that. And I'm wondering, I did notice, I think later in your book you have a chapter on morality or values or something like that. And so if you guys don't mind, if you could just comment a little bit on, maybe science and evolution and morality.
Yes, I really would like to, because that's an extremely important subject.
I'm going to hang up and listen.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil.
It is exactly the most common thing you hear. And in fact, some theologians have tried to argue that that's a proof for the existence of God, just the fact that we have this moral sense. And I say, let's again look at it scientifically. Let's make the hypothesis that God is a source of morals and values, and then let's look at the consequences of that hypothesis. Well, there are a lot of consequences. You would expect that, for one, that religious people should behave better. They should commit fewer crimes, less child abuse, less wife abuse than atheists. Well, there's no evidence for that. And across the board, there's no evidence that there's any difference. In fact, there's even some evidence of the reverse, but I won't try to belabor that. Let's just say that there's no sign that the people who are God-fearing are any better. And believe me, even Christian journals have commented on that, because they've made these surveys among their own people, and they find quite astonishingly that Christian teenagers are just as much involved in sex as non-Christian, and so on. And it troubles them, because they certainly believe that they're trying to teach morality. So does morality come from God? Let's look at the sources that people use. The sources are usually scriptures, and you often hear that the New Testament is such a wonderful document of moral teaching, and yet there is not a single teaching in the original moral teaching in the New Testament, including the Golden Rule. Most Christians think that the Golden Rule is due to Jesus in the Sermon of the Mount, but all they have to do again is read the Bible, and they'll see that that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said it was the law of the prophets, so he doesn't take credit for it himself. And in many other cultures, Confucius had a golden rule. You'll find a golden rule in any number of cultures. And the same thing with every other moral teaching that's in the Bible. Furthermore, there are things in the Bible that we would certainly today regard as immoral. There's support for slavery, there's support for the subjugation of women. And so when a Christian looks at the Bible and says, I'm getting my moral ideas from the Bible, what they're doing is they're getting their moral ideas from themselves, and they're picking and choosing the places in the Bible that happen to support something that they already have decided for themselves independently is right or wrong. Christians certainly don't support slavery, and why? Well, not because the Bible told them not to support it, it's because they themselves have decided that slavery is bad. And there's been an enormous development in recent years of studies on the evolution of morality. There are books and articles. Time magazine must have had, New York Times must have had about a half a dozen articles in recent years in their magazine and other places in recent months about morality. There's an apparent proto-morality in animals. And historically, morality seems to have developed before religion. There were cultures that existed before the modern religions that already had morals and values. So it's pretty clear from looking at it from the facts, looking at what the observations tell you, not theorizing about some source of morality. It really looks like morals do not come from God. It looks like they came from humanity and our own common need to live together. There are a lot of good reasons why we shouldn't lie. What kind of world would we have if everybody lied? We wouldn't be able to rely on anybody. What if everybody killed and stole and everything down the line, all these basic rules. And incidentally, the Ten Commandments have only two commandments, I think, that are even part of any moral system today, and that thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal, I guess, and then there's something about adultery too, coveting your neighbor's wife, and so so maybe there are three of the 10. The rest are basically God saying, "Look, you better worship me or else, and don't worship anybody else." That's what the Ten Commandments, the main story of the Ten Commandments, is all about. And to suggest that the Ten Commandments are the source of the American system, or the Bible is, where in the Bible will you find, or the Ten Commandments will you find democracy, or liberty, all these notions that are
or Trinity. The concept of the Trinity is never actually addressed in the Bible either.
So that's what's so disturbing about this is that the people who make those arguments are making them from such a tremendous position of ignorance, just plain ignorance. Why don't they read these things and these sources and see for themselves? Rather, they kind of theorize. They say, "Well, I can't think of how any way that we could be good except by God." Well, why? Think it through. And that's the best thing that's the only thing I could hope that I could do in a book like mine, and is try to get people to start asking questions and thinking through their arguments, and maybe teaching their children how to not to just rely on authority, their own authority, or anybody's authority, but to figure things out for themselves. And then I think the world will be a heck of a lot better place than it is now, where religion dominates.
I was reading a story, I guess just in the past couple of days, there was a 17-year-old girl, I believe in Iraq, who was stoned to death by her extreme religious community because she had fallen in love with somebody of another religion, and I think had stayed out all night with them or whatever, and literally stoned to death, had rocks thrown at her until she was dead. And while I think that most Americans would look at that, regardless of what their religious beliefs are, and say that's an abomination, that is utterly evil and despicable, and aren't we glad that we're more civilized than that? I think it would be nice if those same Americans would recognize that this is something which is listed as being the morally correct solution to the problem in the holy book that you have. Just because you've graduated away from those barbaric customs doesn't change the fact that you're still based on those. And I guess on that note, we'll go on to, is it Noel?
Yeah.
How you doing, Noel?
Oh, pretty good. I listen to you guys every once in a while, and just to let you know, I do feel I am a Christian, but I do have one question. What's in it for me to be an atheist? What do you offer an individual as an atheist?
What's in it for you to be a Christian?
Well, the promise is eternal life.
Well, I can make all kinds of promises. What I guess I'd say the benefit for here of being an atheist is that I'm not going to make false promises to you. Nobody is. There's no official governing body for atheists. Actually, Dr. Stenger, in the last chapter of your book, you talk about living a life free of God and what benefits.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're not dancing on the end of some kind of strings. You're not letting your life be governed by rules that don't make any sense just because they happen to be the teachings of a particular sect that you belong to. You certainly save on money. You don't have to donate to your church, but that's of course a minor thing. Basically, you're free. You're open. You should read. There's a wonderful statement by Robert Ingersoll about how he. I wish I could recite it by rote, but I can't. You might look it up. He says, "What if when I realized that the universe was natural, it was a great. The chains just fell off me, and I was so thankful to all those people who made it possible for me to be able to live free of these terrible restrictions."
Well, to me, religion is a matter of perspective. You either look out the window and you see God everywhere, or you see God nowhere. And obviously, you've got nowhere. But so I wouldn't even try to waste my time and convince you of otherwise. But it does sort of disappoint me that all three of you guys, which you seem to be fairly intelligent people, want to limit yourself so much. To limit yourself to what there is right now and nothing else. Because I think there's a lot of the things out there that we just don't know.
How are we limiting ourselves? I mean, I'm limiting myself in saying that I'm not going to believe things until there's sufficient justification to believe it. And what you've apparently done, I could say from my point of view, is you've accepted one person's snake oil and rejected other people's snake oil, and I don't see any grounds for that type of thing. I mean, I was a fundamentalist Christian up until this
I'm not
century.
a fundamentalist. I'm an Episcopalian.
I'm just using that as an example. I don't know what your particular beliefs are, but as somebody who professes to be a Christian, you seem to have accepted something, hopefully for a good reason. I'm all in favor of everybody believing things for very good reasons, and not believing things when the reason isn't good enough.
I think my perspective is a good enough reason. Like I said, when I look at nature, God is there.
Okay, and what good does that do for you to look at nature and see something that you call God?
Well, you're really
It supports my position.
you're arguing from a point of ignorance when you say that God is there. Where did you see God? Where's the evidence?
I mean, many things
You're just claiming that God's there. Where's God?
Many things
provide
that
me
we
the evidence,
see.
and I'll believe it.
Many things that we see have a natural explanation. We can see biology controls how things,
I don't
burn,
know.
live, and
I guess
die.
it's
Physics control planets moving and stuff like that. So I don't see God in any of that. I see physics and biology and chemistry and so on.
I don't know. When you look at life on a molecular level, you look at it and you say, how could this come to itself by itself? And I just think that's an impossibility. When you look at time and space,
So basically, because
existence outside time and
But
space.
look, no, but you see, I don't know what particular expertise you have, but if a biologist looks at the molecular level, he sees evolution. If a physicist or a cosmologist looks at the cosmos, he sees a natural universe that has no evidence for God. That's what my whole book is about.
Yes, on the basic level.
None of
but when
this
you
is
go
evidence.
beyond the basic level,
You're operating from a position of not looking at the evidence, not being aware of it.
Again, I say it's all in perspective.
It's not a matter of perspective. Science is a factual study. It's based on taking the data and asking and fitting models to the data, and these models work. We now have models that in biology and in physics and in cosmology that explain everything that we've observed in terms of material processes. What else do you need?
Hello, am I still in the air?
Yeah, I had to put you on hold. There's a problem with the microphones where you can't hear each other talk.
Yes.
Again, it's a matter of perspective. You look at it.
I'm going to let you go on that
Talking in
note.
circles because it's not a matter of
Yeah,
perspective.
because
It's a matter of fact.
the matter of perspective is some of us care whether or not our beliefs are true, and other people just would choose to believe things that are comfortable and comforting. So we've got like a minute and a half left, and we're gonna go ahead and stop there with the calls. There's a line tied up that we're having a problem with. I wanted to thank you, Dr. Stenger, for coming down and being with us today
Well, thank
and
you.
yesterday as well. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Center for Inquiry Austin, who the book is published by Prometheus Books, which is tied to the Council for Secular Humanism. CFI Austin brought him to town. Thanks to Jeff Jones and everybody else for participating and making this happen. You were at Book People yesterday for a book signing, did the nonprofit show yesterday, a lecture. You're going to go to dinner with us after, so you've had a full weekend.
That's right. It's been fun, too.
We're very glad to have had him down here in Austin. We're going to be looking to bring in more guests down in the future. We'd like to hear what you have to say. Anybody who wants to get feedback to us through the TV, to the TV Studios crew, can email tv@atheist-community.org. We'll be at Threadgills here shortly on Riverside. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us. Remember, happy hour on Thursday. And as a reminder to the newly elected board meeting, I'll see you all next Sunday at Ventana del Sol after the regular meeting. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.